Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about donating time. And in particular, donating time to others in circumstances where those others aren't particularly reliable and ultimately leave you stranded. I may have talked about a wargaming podcast that I was involved with maybe 5 years ago now. Maybe even more than 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And having recorded about 6 months worth of episodes with the fellow who was running the podcast, I in fact convinced him after about 3 years off to restart the podcast, and I helped out associated with being the other personality on the podcast. I gave a relatively ho-hum review associated with a product that advertised in one of the sponsor's magazines, and the sponsor kicked up a stink about my relatively ho-hum review, and through all of that, based on the fact that the host couldn't decide who he was going to support, well actually he supported the sponsor, he didn't support me, I realised I just had to move on. I've had a similar situation recently, somewhat more quizzically. I can't really construct it properly in words, but a gentleman who I gave a lot of assistance to associated with his not-for-profit, for some reason, after a brief conversation that I thought was relatively good, decided to unfriend me on Facebook and, in fact, block me more explicitly, and remove himself from, let's just say, a particular podcast that I put a bit of time into associated with a particular hobby. And through this circumstance, I started to wonder whether I should change my behaviour. I'm relatively giving. I'm relatively interested in assisting, some might say mentoring, folks that approach me associated with various projects without some kind of simpatico notion of loyalty or assistance. Oftentimes in these circumstances, I just do it because I kind of like the idea and would like to help out with the idea. And frequently, when these things occur, I find myself just being left. Now, my view with regards to time is it's a very precious and very subtle commodity that can disappear very swiftly, and when you have an opportunity to have more time to focus on the stuff that you really are working on, this is in no way a loss. So in both these circumstances, I've reflected, gosh, I've got all this free time now that I can reinvest into Noble Ape or recording short funks or doing a wide variety of practices that are ultimately supporting some of my end goals. And what's particularly curious through most of these relationships, in fact almost all these relationships, is that the people that I'm involved with have somewhat curious, somewhat disconnected, and certainly very much removed from my particular philosophy associated firstly with work ethic, but also associated with putting out information in a format that as many people can consume as physically possible. I do wonder whether I need to change my behaviour going forward. Maybe being less exuberant, maybe being less assistive, and maybe just focusing more on, treating all these things as just a little piecemeal thing, as opposed to something that requires time, energy, feedback, effort, assistance. In most of these circumstances, you're always going to feel hard done by in some situation because you are putting in more energy and effort than the other party. In this light, I find I can create these circumstances far too frequently, and I probably need to reflect a little bit about the kinds of things that I get involved with. Certainly, I don't foresee me stopping this behaviour in its initial and at least in its descriptive form. I like helping people out. But in terms of the time that I invest and in terms of actually affiliating myself with like-minded folk that have similar philosophical views and oftentimes have a similar work ethic, that's probably got to be a good thing. These random folk that the world puts in front of me, that I try to befriend and assist when things fail, these days, I've had so many of these kind of circumstances, I just move on swiftly. I've got plenty of other things to do. But I probably should optimise in the future for giving maybe slightly less contributive assistance and just letting people do what they do without my direct involvement and certainly without my emotional involvement. I will conclude again by saying time is the precious commodity here, and time that I could be investing into recording short funks, working on Noble Ape, recording Stone Apes, recording model rail radios and editing all these and putting them out to an audience. I need to keep this in mind and just keep my time on that. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.